Hey guys, tonight we drift into something that doesn't quite have a name. Maybe it never did. Imagine you're walking alone, late evening, barefoot on wood planks warmed by a fading sun. There's a wind, not too cold, not too warm. It brushes past your ear and slips away before you can tell where it came from. You stop, turn, and realize something slightly uncomfortable. You've been following a breeze without asking why. And maybe, just maybe, it was never leading anywhere in the first place. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop that in the comments if you feel like it. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been moving a lot lately, not just physically, but in your head. Buzzing with quiet plans, old conversations, moments you should have handled differently. Your mind is like a wind that forgot where it was supposed to go. It doesn't crash, it doesn't howl, but it doesn't stop either. In ancient Chinese poetry, they often speak of the wind as something alive. Not metaphorically alive, but actually conscious in its own way. And if it is, what would it feel like to drift forever? Never landing, never resting, just brushing past windows and regrets. In early Zen monasteries, there was a rule that wasn't written but always followed: never chase the breeze. It was a metaphor used for thoughts. One monk, Elder Dengyo, founder of the Japanese Tendai school, reportedly sat so still under a wind-battered pine that birds nested in his sleeves, not because he was stubborn, but because the wind had to learn it couldn't move everything. Spiritual researchers are still debating whether meditation can actually alter the brain's default mode network, the part that mind wanders. But in the calm of certain minds, something shifts. And maybe it doesn't matter if the structure changes. Maybe the point is you change how you sit with the wind. There's a Zen tale you'd like. No swords, no temples, just a man, a hill, and a breeze. He climbed every morning, always with tea leaves in his pocket, just enough for one cup. He'd sit, brew quietly, and talk to the wind like it was an old friend who never listened. One day, the wind didn't come. No breeze, not even a twitch of the grass. He waited, an hour, two. Eventually he smiled, poured the tea onto the dry ground and said, "Ah, so you learned to rest too. You don't have to stop thinking. No one expects that. But you might consider this. Not every breeze needs your attention. Not every draft is an invitation. Some are just passing through, and you're allowed to nod politely and let them go. Imagine your thoughts tonight as clouds, and you, just the sky. No need to follow. They will move, and even if they circle back, they'll grow tired eventually. They all do, even the most persistent ones. This is why monks often sweep paths that no one walks, why they wipe down already clean tables. The gesture itself becomes the practice, sweeping winds from the corners of the mind. You may find that stillness isn't a place. It's more like remembering you never had to leave where you were. The wind can't forget its name if it never had one to begin with. So as you lie there, listen for that breeze. It may come, it may not, and that's perfectly okay, because right now, you are not the wind. You are the quiet it moves through. You wake up the next morning, or at least your body does. Your mind lags behind, like someone forgetting their keys and walking back inside. It's quiet, but not silent. Something hums in the distance, maybe a fan, maybe the leftover echo of a thought you didn't quite finish last night. There's a story told in the northern provinces of Thailand, where the rains come not politely, but with theatrical flair. Ajahn Chah, a revered forest monk, once sat under a thatched shelter that barely kept out the storm. A visiting Western student, wide-eyed and dripping, asked, "Aren't you uncomfortable?" And the monk, smiling like someone who'd just heard an inside joke from the trees, said, "It's only rain. Why fight it?" The students sat, they got wet. They learned something their books hadn't mentioned. This monk, Ajahn Chah, had a habit of speaking to the elements. Not in a mystic way, more like a quiet dare. Once, during a particularly brutal monsoon, he refused to move from his sitting place. Villagers brought offerings, watched nervously, and whispered among themselves. What if he gets sick? What if the wind wins? But the wind didn't. The rain did what rain does. It fell, it passed, and the monk didn't declare victory. He just kept sitting. Spiritual historians sometimes argue whether this kind of radical equanimity is learned or inherent. Can you train yourself to not flinch when the world shouts? Or are there some minds simply built different, like caves too deep to echo back the storm? You lie still, thinking about the last time you avoided discomfort, not just physical, but emotional. Maybe you dodged an awkward text. Maybe you made a joke to swerve away from something too honest. The modern world isn't a monsoon, but it has its own winds. Deadlines, news cycles, glances that last a little too long and say a little too much. And yet, something in you knows, if you just sit, let it pass, let the breath come and go like a tide that doesn't care whether you're ready or not, maybe you'll discover what Ajahn Chah meant. The wind doesn't need to stop for you to rest. It just needs to become irrelevant. In certain Thai monasteries, there's a practice where monks lie on their backs in the forest, eyes open to the canopy, for hours. They don't move. Insects walk across their robes. Leaves fall directly onto their faces. And the point isn't endurance. The point is trust. Trust that the world doesn't need your reaction to keep spinning. You might find that hard. Your mind is trained to respond, trained to label, to fix, to tweet. Silence feels like negligence. Stillness feels like slacking off. But maybe that's just another breeze, one that tells you stories to keep you spinning. The real silence? It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't feel dramatic. It's the absence of the need to react. Imagine sitting in a downpour, knowing your skin will dry, your clothes will cling, your bones will remember, but none of it will last. Not the wet, not the worry. Just you, and a breeze that once thought it was your master. Right now, you're in no danger. The world isn't asking anything of you. You don't have to answer any storm. You don't have to explain your piece. And if a thought comes in, tapping your shoulder like an old friend with unfinished business, just let it sit beside you. It doesn't need fixing. It just wants a little company. And when the wind shifts again, and it will, don't chase it, just nod. Say hello, and stay where you are. You are now deep in the rhythm of it. Not sleep yet, not quite, but the thinking is softened. There's no pressure to stay sharp. In fact, dullness feels like a luxury tonight, like stretching into a moment that doesn't need anything from you. Let's go to Japan a few centuries ago. Somewhere in the Kyoto Mountains, a bell tower stands, not the grand kind that booms across cities. This one is modest, wooden, and built just high enough to catch the wind. Inside it hangs a bronze bell that no one has rung for over a decade. The story goes that it was meant for rituals. But one monk, quiet, very old, name long forgotten, decided that silence was the truer sound. So he simply stopped using it, didn't remove it, didn't announce it, just let it be silent. Eventually, no one remembered the chant it was meant to accompany. Now it just sways when the wind moves through, offering no sound but the creak of rope and wood. Visitors come, expecting a chime. They leave with a strange feeling in their chest, like they heard something without hearing anything. This isn't an isolated tradition. In some Zen temples, especially the smaller, more remote ones, there are instruments left untouched on purpose. Drums that collect dust, flutes no one plays. Not because they're broken, but because they remind people that presence doesn't always need punctuation. Spiritual researchers in sound therapy have long explored the psychological power of expected silence. They call it anticipatory stillness. The moment your body prepares for a sound and it doesn't come, something in you exhales, something in you unknots. You've probably had that sensation, waiting for a reply that never comes, expecting a noise that never arrives, listening to your phone buzz when it didn't. Annoying, maybe, but in a monastery, it's sacred. You're conditioned to fill in the gaps. When silence shows up, your instinct is to ask what's wrong. But sometimes nothing's wrong. Sometimes silence is what the bell has been saying all along. You might wonder what kind of person chooses to live like that. To sit beneath a bell that never rings, listening for what's not there. But in truth, you've already done it. Every time you stare at the ceiling before sleep, every time you forget what you were worrying about, every time you exhale without a plan, you've been listening too. Monks will sometimes describe meditation as listening to silence, listening back. Odd phrase, but you get it. That hush in the air that feels like it has eyes. Tonight, you're under your own silent bell tower. Your thoughts sway like the rope in the rafters, but no one needs to strike anything. Let the bell just be a shape. Let the wind just be weather. You are not required to interpret every breeze, every quiet. And if you catch yourself searching for meaning, that's fine. The mind is a meaning machine. But for now, you're allowed to turn it off. Or at least, set it to gentle hum. Somewhere, an old monk smiles in his sleep. Not because he solved anything, but because the bell didn't ring, and that was enough. Your feet feel heavier tonight, even though you're not walking. There's a weight, not unpleasant, but grounded, like the soul of your body just remembered where it lives. And in that stillness, you feel an echo of something ancient. Something that starts from the ground up. In a monastery near Mount Jirisan in South Korea, novices are met not with mantras, but with a peculiar instruction. Leave your shoes outside, not just the door, outside the gate, even in rain, even in snow. If the weather destroys them, so be it. The lesson? Leave everything at the threshold, even your need for protection. A monk once told a new student, your shoes are the last part of your ego to give up. The student thought it was a joke. It wasn't. The tradition goes back centuries, blending shamanic roots and Korean Seon Buddhism. Novices would walk the mountain paths barefoot for months, not as punishment, but as practice, to feel the earth directly, to let discomfort be a tutor. Because the mind that can't walk barefoot is a mind that still clings to the illusion of control. Spiritual researchers have studied sensory deprivation and its effect on ego. Some argue that the less you insulate yourself, the less separate you feel from the world. And maybe that's true. But you don't need to walk on gravel to learn this. You just need to recognize the shoes you wear in your mind. You might still be wearing them right now. Old arguments, unresolved shame, someone's offhand comment that's been echoing longer than it should. Those are shoes, and they squeak more than you think. You don't have to throw them away. Just notice them. Set them down for a while, outside the door of this moment. Back to the mountain. There's a spot behind the temple, under pine trees that drop needles like silent rain. Monks used to sit there with their backs to the wall, facing out into nothing. No scrolls, no incense, no teachings. The only instruction was, just sit until you forget you're sitting. A traveler once asked an old nun there, "What do you think about when you sit?" She smiled. "I don't know. The thoughts come, the thoughts go. But the earth doesn't seem to mind." And maybe that's the key. The earth doesn't mind if you're brilliant, broken, anxious, enlightened, or completely lost. It just holds you, barefoot or not. Tonight, picture yourself standing at the gate of that monastery. The air is cool, the pine needles crackle beneath you. In your hand, you hold a pair of shoes made of opinions, regrets, to-do lists, timelines. You don't need them in there. You really don't. Leave them by the gate, they'll be fine, or maybe they won't. Either way, you won't miss them as much as you think. Walk in, barefoot, soft, free, and let the world feel you back. Your breath slows, not because you're trying to control it, but because something deeper has taken over. Like your lungs finally remembered they've been doing this long before you ever noticed. In that quiet, another story rises. There's an old tale from India, somewhere in the early centuries after the Buddha walked the earth. It's said that one day, a disciple approached him, eyes blazing with urgency, and asked the kind of question you only ask when you think you're ready to hear the answer. "Master, what is the meaning of all this?" The Buddha looked at him for a long time, a very long time. He didn't blink, he didn't speak. Then as a breeze rolled in and tugged at the hem of his robe, the Buddha turned his gaze to the wind and said nothing. The disciple waited and waited, but no answer came. Eventually, the Buddha walked away, not out of indifference, but as if the question had already been answered by the breeze itself. It became known as the question without a reply. And depending on who tells the story, the disciple either became enlightened or gave up and became a merchant. Both endings are considered valid. What's certain is this: not every question is meant to be answered with words. Some are meant to unravel slowly, in the silence between breaths, in the weight of a gaze that says more than an entire library. In some Buddhist lineages, students are given koans, riddles with no solution. Not to frustrate them, but to exhaust the part of the mind that demands certainty. A famous one asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" But another, more obscure, asks, "Where does the wind go when it's done whispering?" Spiritual psychologists debate whether these koans actually create cognitive dissonance intense enough to trigger insight. But whether they do or not, The point remains, some things are meant to be sat with, not solved. You've probably asked your own version of that disciple's question, maybe not to a sage under a fig tree, but to the night sky, to your bedroom ceiling, to a message left on read. And maybe like him, you've heard nothing in return. But silence is an answer too, especially when it's wrapped in wind. Imagine you're back in that moment, sitting with a master who says nothing. Your mind is racing. Your heart wants clarity. And yet, the only thing that comes is a breeze brushing your shoulder. And somehow you start to feel that maybe the breeze knew better than words ever could. So tonight, you don't need to understand. You don't have to earn insight. Let your thoughts rise like the question. Let your breath answer nothing. And when the breeze comes through the room, or maybe just through your memory, let it pass without catching it. The answer isn't always on the other side of the question. Sometimes it's in the letting go of the need to ask. A cup sits on the windowsill, half filled with rain. No one placed it there with intention. It just ended up under the sky at the right moment. And now it reflects a bit of cloud, a crooked shadow, and the vague sense of time passing. This image, simple as it is, brings to mind the wandering poet monk Ryokan. If you haven't met him yet, he's the kind of figure who makes loneliness feel like an art form. He lived alone, wrote poems in the margins of daylight, played with village children, and once gave away the last of his clothes because someone else looked colder. There's a story of him sitting beside a teacup left out overnight. He didn't drink from it, just stared, then laughed. Not a loud laugh, more like a breath that turned into sound. Someone asked him why, and he said, "The cup is full of rain, and yet it's still thirsty." That might make no sense at first, and that's the point. In certain Japanese Zen lineages, teachers would give students poems like that, not as lessons, but as mirrors. You think the cup is the subject. Maybe it's you, maybe it's thought, maybe it's nothing at all, maybe you just needed a place to rest your mind. Spiritual researchers sometimes refer to these ambiguous metaphors as cognitive cones, short circuits for the analytical mind. They don't explain, they dissolve. They leave just enough space for silence to echo. Tonight you may be carrying a teacup too, filled with things you didn't mean to collect. Unanswered questions, emotional weather, that sigh you swallowed earlier when someone misunderstood you. You don't need to pour it out, just notice it, acknowledge the weight. It doesn't need to mean anything profound. Sometimes the cup is just full of rain. Ryokan once lost his inkstone in a river. Instead of lamenting, he dipped his fingers in mud and kept writing poems on stones. And when those washed away, he simply smiled and wrote another with his breath on a cold window. This is not about detachment, it's about gentle absurdity, the kind that frees you without demanding applause. You don't need to become Ryokan, but you might try this. The next time your thoughts feel heavy, ask yourself, is my mind a cup trying to hold the sky? Then take a breath and let it spill a little. There's peace in not containing everything. And sometimes when the cup overflows, you finally see what you no longer need to hold. So if you lie awake, feeling like you've gathered too much, remember, you're allowed to laugh like Ryokan. The rain falls, the cup fills, and still, it thirsts. You're starting to drift, not just into sleep, but into a gentler way of being with your own thoughts. You're not trying to fix them anymore, just sitting beside them, watching them breathe. There's an image used in old Zen scrolls, rarely translated into English. It shows a handheld fan, painted in delicate ink, wide open but unmoving. Beneath it, the caption reads, "Coolness is not in the fan." This puzzled scholars for generations, but monks understood. It wasn't about tools, it was about mistaken expectations. You don't cool yourself by holding a fan, you cool yourself by moving it. And even then, what you're really doing is moving air that's already there. So then, what is enlightenment? Is it a fan that cools, or the air that was never gone? Modern spiritual researchers argue whether the metaphors in Zen lead to insight or just poetic confusion. But that debate misses the point. The goal isn't clarity, it's intimacy, with paradox, with your own confusion, with the strangeness of being a thinking creature who tries to think their way out of thinking. You've probably tried to do that. We all have. You feel anxious, so you think about how to stop being anxious, which leads to more thinking, more loops, more mental fans waving in stale air. But what if you stopped waving? What if the moment you stopped trying to generate peace, you noticed the breeze that was always moving around you? Not dramatic, not life-changing, just quiet, steady enough. Ajahn Mun, one of Thailand's most revered forest monks, once said that peace is not created, it's uncovered, like a lake beneath the weeds. His disciples often sat in silence for days, not because they had nothing to say, but because they realized most words were just fans trying to prove they worked. There's a passage in the Pali Canon where a disciple asks the Buddha, "Is there something beyond thought?" And the Buddha, in his usual non-answer way, simply closed his eyes and smiled, not out of smugness, but like someone who had just remembered a breeze from their childhood. You may have spent your life trying to manufacture stillness, through apps, through routines, through rituals, and there's nothing wrong with that. But tonight, try less. Wave the fan once, then rest your hand. Let the air find you. Let the room hold you like a monk holding a riddle too soft to solve. The wind does not need a fan to be real, and you don't need effort to be at ease. Just stop waving, and notice what's been moving all along. A leaf drifts past your window. You barely catch it, just a blur in the corner of your eye, like a thought that doesn't need your attention. And that's the perfect place to begin. In Vietnam, there was a master named Trần Nhân Tông, a king who gave up his throne to become a monk. They say he once watched leaves fall for 3 full hours without moving, without speaking, just watching. A disciple approached him, concerned. "Master, what are you contemplating?" He replied, "Each leaf lets go in its own way." It became one of those quiet Zen phrases that traveled across centuries, carved into wooden plaques, whispered during autumn tea ceremonies. Because it wasn't really about leaves, it was about you. In the monastic tradition of Yentu Mountain, letting go isn't a decision, it's a movement. The body exhales, the thought fades, the leaf loosens on its own time, and no one judges it for waiting too long or falling too early. You carry things that haven't fallen yet, not because you're doing it wrong, but because your season hasn't turned. That's okay. Psychologists studying emotional release talk about the mind's resistance to unresolved grief or suppressed joy. They call it emotional tension, a kind of inner tightness we stop noticing. But monks don't analyze the leaf, they simply sit beneath the tree and wait. You don't have to rush your fall, you don't have to force clarity, you just need to recognize when you're gripping the branch. And when you're ready, the breeze will do the rest. Some leaves fall in spirals, others drop like stones. Some hesitate, then change their minds halfway down, and still the tree offers no commentary. Tonight, picture that, a tree full of your thoughts, your memories, your should-haves and might-stills, each one a leaf, each one doing its thing. You don't need to shake the tree, you don't need to name each leaf. Just sit at the base, let them come, let them go. A master once told a novice who couldn't sleep, maybe it's not the pillow that's heavy, it's the memory inside it. You understand that. Maybe you've laid down many nights, holding on not with your hands, but with your remembering. But look, a leaf just fell, quietly, gently. Without asking your permission, it let go because it was ready, and it didn't ask if you were. So tonight, let a few thoughts drift, not because you're giving up, but because you're finally giving space. No one will count the leaves, no one will ask how fast you emptied the tree. The wind will come again, and all it asks is that you don't resist the letting go. Watch, wait, breathe, and let the leaves decide. The dishes are still in the sink, you know it. They know it. And yet, for once, they're not accusing you, they're just being. A quiet monument to daily life, waiting without judgment. There's a story whispered in the smaller Zen temples of Japan, the ones that don't make the tourist brochures. In one such place, nestled between the hills of Shiga Prefecture, monks dedicate entire evenings to what they call moonlight chores, not urgent, not even necessary. Just the slow cleaning of already clean spaces under the soft silver gaze of the moon. They polish wood that's not dirty, sweep floors that have been swept already, and yes, they wash bowls that were never used. Why? Because movement, done without urgency, becomes stillness, and stillness done with awareness becomes presence. You think stillness means stopping, but not always. Sometimes it means doing things so gently, so deliberately that your thoughts can't keep up. They have to wait at the door while your hands move on their own. In Korean Seon practice, there's a phrase, "The water is warmest after the bowl is clean." It doesn't mean anything at first, until you wash a bowl not to finish, but to feel the curve of its rim, the echo of your fingers on ceramic. Psychologists call this task absorption, a mental state where the self disappears into action. It's not flashy like flow states, it's quieter, deeper, more like becoming the soap rather than mastering the task. You've had moments like that. Maybe folding laundry and realizing your breathing matched the rhythm of the fabric, or stirring tea and feeling time slow down, just for a second. Those are your moonlight chores. In the Zen temple, there's no reward for a well-washed bowl, no gold star, no enlightenment certificate, just the feeling of suds on your fingertips, just the way the moonlight hits water as it drains. One monk once whispered to another, "I think the dishes understand me better than people do." And both of them laughed. Not because it was silly, but because it was true. So tonight, picture yourself standing barefoot in that temple kitchen. The air is cool, the wooden floor creaks beneath you, a single candle flickers on the windowsill, and in front of you, a bowl. Not dirty, not clean, just waiting. You pick it up, not to escape thought, but to meet it, to hold it gently like a question without a rush to answer. And as the water runs, you don't think about deadlines, or who said what, or what tomorrow expects from you. You just wash the bowl, and the bowl, in its own quiet way, washes you back. Because sometimes peace doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it sneaks in through warm water, soft light, and a dish that never needed scrubbing. There's a candle in the corner of the room. Maybe not a real one, maybe just a flicker in your memory. The kind of flame that dances without heat, that leans gently as if bowing to something only it can see. In certain Zen rituals, candles are lit not for light, but for attention. You don't stare at the flame, you sit beside it. The practice is simple. Observe the candle without naming it. No fire, no wax, no glow. Just let it be what it is, without dressing it in language. In the early morning hours of some Korean monasteries, practitioners will gather around a single candle and meditate until the flame extinguishes on its own. They don't time it, they don't watch the wax. They just sit in stillness until darkness arrives. When it does, no one moves. The ceremony is over, but no one declares it. The candle ends the practice, not the clock. There was once a novice who grew impatient during one of these sessions. After 30 minutes, he sighed, leaned forward, and blew out the flame. The master didn't scold him. Instead, he nodded and said, "Now you know how the mind extinguishes itself when you try too hard. It's strange, isn't it? We try so hard to keep the light alive, to hold on to clarity, warmth, certainty. And yet in Zen, there's deep wisdom in letting the candle go dark. Not as failure, but as transformation. Some researchers in contemplative psychology talk about liminal darkness, the in-between state when the senses lose their anchors, and the mind quiets not from suppression, but surrender. They study how this emptiness can paradoxically feel full, not of things, but of space, of permission, of quiet. You don't need to blow out your inner flame, but maybe you could sit beside it without trying to control its flicker. Let it sway, let it bow, and when it's ready, let it fade. The Japanese word for this kind of moment is komorebi, the dappled light that filters through leaves. But there's also a lesser-known word, yugen, a subtle grace that cannot be fully described, only felt in moments like this. When the flame bows to the dark, when you exhale without needing to know what comes next. Picture yourself in that monastery room, the floor cool beneath you, the scent of old wood in the air, the candle still, breathing in rhythm with you. Not asking anything, not performing, just being. And then softly it fades, no applause, no regrets, just the darkness wrapping around you like a soft blanket. And in that moment, you realize you didn't lose the light, you became it. A bird sings once, then stops. No melody, no chorus, just one clean note cutting through the quiet, and then nothing. There's a Zen saying, less quoted, more whispered, about a bird that forgot its song, not from sadness, not from trauma. Just one day it didn't feel like singing, and instead of forcing the melody, it perched in silence. And there, in the hush, it found a kind of peace it never heard before. The story was never about birds, of course, it was about us. In a small temple near Kyoto, there was once a monk who practiced silence so long that even his gestures grew quieter. He didn't just move slowly, he moved softly, as if the air had weight and deserved respect. People called him the mute teacher, though he spoke when needed. He simply preferred to wait for words to land before deciding if they needed wings. One winter, a young student asked him, "Why don't you chant like the others?" The monk smiled and tapped his chest lightly. "I used to, until I realized I was doing it to prove I existed." Modern psychologists might call this performative identity, that tendency to confirm we're real by producing sound, movement, output, as if being quiet somehow makes us disappear. But what if it doesn't? What if silence is not an absence, but a deeper kind of presence? You may have felt that, in a room full of people, choosing not to speak, not from shyness, but from calm, from knowing that nothing needs to be added, and that sometimes being the echo instead of the voice is enough. In Buddhist tradition, there's a practice called noble silence, not just the absence of talking, but the abstaining from noise that arises out of habit or fear. Monks don't just stop speaking, they stop needing to fill the space. Tonight, maybe you too can become a bird that forgets its song. Not forever, just for now. Rest your voice, even the one in your head. Especially the one in your head. Let it stop narrating, let it perch. There's a quiet that lives beneath language, not beneath in hierarchy, but in depth. And it holds you like wind holds a feather, gently, invisibly, patiently. You are not less real in silence. You are not forgotten, you are not erased. You're simply here. And in this moment where nothing needs to be said, you join the long lineage of soft-voiced sages and songless birds. They're not waiting for applause, they're just breathing. Somewhere, there's a garden no one sees. Not because it's hidden, but because it's raked with invisible lines. There's a temple in rural Japan, rarely marked on maps, where monks wake early, not to chant, not to sweep leaves, but to draw patterns into sand with sticks too dull to leave a mark. They call it the practice of muke, or form without form. Tourists sometimes visit expecting the perfect ripples of a Zen garden, only to find what looks like untouched gravel. No lines, no design, but if you watch the monks you see it. Their eyes follow a path only they can feel, arms moving in deliberate arcs, tracing silence into stone. When asked why they rake what cannot be seen, one monk answered, "Because the soul doesn't need the evidence." This is where we meet the idea of invisible rituals, the gestures we make, not to prove something, but to embody something. Psychologists might call this embodied cognition. Monks call it living with the unseen. You probably have rituals of your own. That quiet stretch before you stand, that extra moment in the shower when your hand rests against the wall. No one applauds these moments. They don't show up in highlight reels, but they shape your inner world. Imagine every worry you've had today. Now imagine raking a garden with each one. Not to erase them, not even to fix them, just to acknowledge the weight of their shape. To leave grooves where the mind once circled, and then let the sand settle. The monastery that rakes invisibly doesn't do it for art. They do it because even unseen effort leaves a trace inside. There's an old saying, the moon moves the ocean, even if it never touches it. Your smallest rituals do the same. They move things, quietly, permanently, whether anyone else sees them or not. Tonight, picture a quiet courtyard, lanterns low, gravel cool and damp beneath a cloudless sky. A rake in your hand, no pressure to perform. No lines to get straight, just you, the rhythm, and the knowing that what you're doing matters, even if no one claps. You rake a path for your thoughts, and then you leave it behind, not erased, just no longer needed. And the garden, in its own quiet way, thanks you. Clouds pass slowly overhead, and you don't ask them where they're going, because they never answer, because they never have to. There's a long tradition in Japanese Zen painting where monks use nothing but water, not ink, not pigment, just brush strokes of clear water on thin paper. The image appears briefly, delicate lines catching the light, and then slowly it fades. The practice is called mizue, and it's not for display, it's for the moment. Because the moment is all that exists. One monk, after completing a particularly graceful piece, was asked why he didn't preserve it. He smiled and said, "The point was to feel it, not to frame it." We're not wired for that, most of us. We want to hold on, to capture, to screenshot life and store it in folders named important. But clouds don't care if you remember them, and neither does the wind. Modern psychologists studying impermanence often talk about memory consolidation, how we decide which experiences are worth keeping. But monks don't always decide. They let the moment decide for them, and if it disappears, that's just part of the deal. There's a Korean tradition too called Byeolum, painting on snow. Monks use bamboo sticks or fingers to sketch scenes on the surface of fresh snowfall. Petals, mountains, a sleeping moon, and then they walk away before it melts. One novice once tried to save his snow painting by covering it with cloth. The elder simply laughed. If you must cover it, you never really saw it. What in your life are you still trying to cover? What moments are you trying to freeze when they were never meant to stay? There's no shame in that. It's human. It's loving even. But there's peace in letting go before you're forced to. Tonight, maybe you let a few clouds go untracked. Maybe you let a few thoughts pass by without assigning them meaning. Maybe you let this moment exist without a screenshot. Sit beside the paper, dip your mental brush into calm, and make a stroke with no intention of keeping it. Because sometimes beauty lives not in the thing, but in its disappearance. And sometimes the truest parts of you are the ones that never needed to be remembered. Your breath feels softer now, like the air is walking barefoot inside your chest. And in that stillness, you begin to notice the things stitched into silence. Not thoughts, not memories, but pauses, gentle, deliberate pauses. There's a story from a Korean temple high in the mountains of Gangwon-do. The winters there are sharp, the kind that make even words shiver. A nun named Hai Sun spent her days sewing robes, not for function, but for meditation. Every stitch she made, she whispered a breath between. Not a prayer, just a pause. One evening, a young novice watched her work and asked, "Why do you stop after every thread?" She looked up, not with surprise, but with the kind of smile that feels like old sunlight, and replied, "Because silence makes the stitch hold." Her robes weren't fancy, plain cotton, rough in texture, but every fold carried the rhythm of her awareness, and that made them warmer than wool. In Zen, there's a practice called Nyo-ho-e, which means robes sewn in accordance with Dharma. It's not about the fabric, it's about the way you move through the act. The pauses become part of the pattern. The space between gestures becomes the gesture itself. Spiritual researchers have examined this idea through the lens of embodied mindfulness, how intentional movement, even at its smallest, alters brain states associated with stress. But no scanner can detect what Hai Sun stitched into those robes. Because it wasn't a chemical shift, it was presence made physical. You've likely sewn a few things of your own, though not with needle and thread. Texts you wrote and erased, words you didn't say. The deep inhale before you forgave someone, even if only inside your head. Those were your pauses, your invisible stitches. Tonight you're wrapped in them. Even now, as you listen, they're around your shoulders. Not to impress, not to protect, just to remind you that you are always surrounded by the quiet you've chosen to carry. So take a breath, then pause. Feel the moment settle into place, then take another. You don't need to fill every silence, you just need to respect it. Because some of the strongest threads in your life were the ones tied between thoughts, between words, between nights like this. And sometimes, the robe that holds you best is the one stitched with pauses. The wind has quieted now, not gone, just softer. It lingers at the edge of the room, like a thought that has said what it came to say. And you, lying here, are no longer chasing it. In the stories told beneath the Bodhi tree, there's one that doesn't make it into many books. It's not about the moment of enlightenment, it's about what happened after. They say the Buddha didn't move for days, didn't teach, didn't speak, just sat. The wind moved through the branches, and he let it pass. People gathered, waiting for some grand announcement, but there was none. Because what needed to be said had already happened in the silence. One disciple whispered, "Why won't he speak?" Another answered, "Maybe he's listening to what the wind finally became." You don't need to believe that story. Maybe it's real, maybe it's just a metaphor whispered over centuries. But the image holds. A figure beneath a tree, unmoving, unhurried, surrounded by a world that no longer pulls at him. You've spent so much time moving, thinking, adjusting, performing, and tonight you've done something rare, you stopped. Psychologists sometimes speak of cognitive rest, not just sleep, but the deeper reset that comes when the brain is no longer on guard. It's not a collapse, it's a return, a remembering that you're allowed to just be. If the wind could forget its name, then maybe you can too. Not forever, not as an escape, but as a kindness. To lay down the self you've been managing all day, all week, maybe all your life. The one who needs to be understood, to be useful, to be improving. You're not broken, you're not unfinished, you're just tired from holding on to every breeze that passed. So lie there, let the final winds of thought pass over you, like the hem of a robe fluttering across stone. Nothing left to prove, no storm to weather, just you and the silence you've earned. And maybe, like the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, you too are ready to stop answering questions. Maybe now it's enough to simply breathe. And so the candle has flickered low, the leaves have all fallen, and the cup on the windowsill is empty again. Not because something was lost, but because you finally let it go. This is the part where nothing happens. No answers arrive. No revelations shout. It's just you, and a stillness that has patiently waited all night for you to notice it. The wind, once restless, now rests inside your breath. You've been many things today. A thinker, a fixer, a dreamer. But here now, you're just presence. Soft, slow, unburdened. The monks say that when the heart grows quiet, it starts to listen to the space between things. Between thoughts, between the inhale and exhale, between the beat and the pause. And in that space, there is no past to rewrite, no future to anticipate. Just this gentle unfolding of now. Maybe the wind never had a name. Maybe it was never meant to. Maybe you were never meant to hold every idea so tightly, or solve every mystery before rest. Tonight, you gave yourself the gift of silence, of listening, of letting even the most persistent questions drift away like incense rising into the dark. You did enough. You are enough. And if the wind returns tomorrow, let it find you sleeping, peacefully, weightlessly, held by nothing. And that is perfectly okay.